Shocking! Iranian forces stealthily invade U.S. shores. Operation Black Tide strikes back. In a shocking turn of events, at 2:15 a.m. on August 14, 2025, Iranian forces executed one of the most daring military maneuvers in modern history. Under the cover of darkness, 30 specialized amphibious assault ships, packed with heavy military equipment and elite naval infantry, quietly cut through the cold, dark waters of the North Pacific. Their destination? A small, isolated fishing town in Oregon, miles from the closest military installation. Iran's intentions were clear: invade, seize, and establish a strategic forward base on U.S. soil. With over 120 main battle tanks, 60 armored personnel carriers, and 500 elite Marines on board, the Iranian flotilla was poised to land in an unprotected coastal area, unchallenged by any major U.S. defense. Iran believed that their stealth approach, with ships operating under low radar signature, would keep them undetected as they moved in. They thought they had the perfect plan. But they were walking into a carefully laid trap, one that would be triggered at the exact moment they stepped into a pre-drawn kill box designed for just such an invasion. Above the Iranian fleet, at an altitude of 65,000 feet, an American stealth drone was silently tracking their every move. For nearly an hour, the U.S. Navy had been watching and gathering data on the Iranian ships. Every move, every formation change was being recorded in real time, updated every 5 seconds. This was no surprise to U.S. commanders. In fact, the moment the Iranian fleet entered the North Pacific, American forces had already set their plan into motion. The Iranian fleet, composed of 30 assault ships carrying tanks and armed Marines, had only one advantage: the element of surprise. The U.S. had no immediate response ready as these vessels advanced on a town with just over 3,000 residents and no modern coastal defense. Iran's mission was straightforward: land on U.S. soil, take control of the town, fortify it, and use it as a base for future operations. But little did they know, America had anticipated this very move. The U.S. Navy was already in full alert mode. Encrypted messages had been transmitted to Pacific Fleet Command in San Diego, triggering Operation Black Tide, a rapid response protocol meant to eliminate any amphibious invasion force within 15 minutes. For the Americans, the situation was not just about defending U.S. soil, it was about sending a message to the world. Any attack on U.S. territory would be met with overwhelming force. The American trap was carefully designed, and its execution was almost perfect. The Iranian fleet, still unaware of the imminent danger, advanced towards their target. The plan was simple: allow the Iranian forces to move into the kill box, a lethal corridor 22 nautical miles wide and 35 nautical miles long, before unleashing the full weight of American firepower. As the Iranian ships approached, the countdown was ticking. The U.S. Navy's response would be swift and decisive. At 2:42 a.m., just as the Iranian fleet crossed into the kill box, the first wave of American drones launched. 80 MQ-25 Stingray drones, each carrying 2 500-pound precision-guided bombs, began their deadly ballet in the sky. These drones, capable of targeting from 20 miles away with pinpoint accuracy, locked onto their targets and prepared to strike. On the ground, 2 U.S. coastal missile batteries armed with 24 RGM-84 Harpoon anti-ship missiles stood ready. Each missile weighed 1,500 pounds and carried a 488-pound warhead designed to obliterate the Iranian vessels. And under the ocean, the USS North Dakota, a Virginia-class attack submarine, was already in position, silently waiting for the right moment to unleash its arsenal of heavyweight torpedoes and Tomahawk missiles. At exactly 2:42 and 7 a.m., the first bombs began to fall from the drones. In just 4.8 seconds, 160 GBU-53B small-diameter bombs were released, hitting the Iranian ships with devastating force. The effect was nothing short of apocalyptic. One ship erupted in a massive fireball, sending 24 tons of steel fragments into the ocean. Another vessel's deck split open, throwing armored personnel carriers into the water like toys. The shockwaves from the explosions were so powerful that Iranian Marines standing 200 meters away were thrown overboard. Within seconds, the Iranian formation was in chaos. Ships swerved violently to avoid the burning wrecks, breaking their defensive formations. But the Americans weren't finished yet. The second wave of drone strikes hit within moments, sending another 160 bombs into the Iranian fleet, decimating radar systems, ammunition stores, and fuel tanks. The response was devastating. In less than 50 seconds after the first strike, 14 Iranian ships were either sinking or engulfed in flames. Over 180 Iranian Marines were confirmed dead in the initial wave, with countless others trapped inside their ships as fires raged around them. The Iranians were in full retreat, but there was no escape. As the Iranian ships turned to flee, USS North Dakota fired 4 heavyweight torpedoes at the retreating vessels. Guided by sonar, these torpedoes struck with precision, snapping the hulls of 2 ships in half and sending them to the ocean floor within 90 seconds. Meanwhile, the remaining drones continued their deadly mission, shifting from bombs to AGM-114R, Hellfire missiles to target the lifeboats and smaller assault vessels, trying to ferry Iranian Marines to shore. By 2:48 a.m., the once proud Iranian flotilla had been completely annihilated, and the U.S. Navy had secured victory. The battle had lasted less than 6 minutes from the first strike to the final missile impact, but the consequences for Iran were catastrophic. 26 Iranian ships were destroyed, 120 tanks and 60 APCs were lost, and over 300 Marines were confirmed dead. The operation, executed flawlessly, resulted in 0 American casualties. This military action, dubbed Operation Black Tide, not only destroyed an entire Iranian invasion force, but also sent a powerful message to the world. Any attempt to challenge U.S. sovereignty would be met with overwhelming force and precision. As the smoke began to clear over the North Pacific, the scope of the destruction became evident. Iranian naval officers were left scrambling for answers, while the U.S. Navy's seamless execution of Operation Black Tide resonated across military communities worldwide. For the Iranian commanders, it was a devastating blow, one that wiped out years of planning and left a glaring hole in their strategic ambitions. The consequences were not just military but political. Iran's credibility was severely damaged, and their ambitions of extending influence on U.S. soil were shattered. In the hours following the attack, U.S. Navy recovery teams were already at work, pulling survivors from the freezing waters. Of the 500 Marines who had set sail with hopes of conquering a piece of America, only 200 would be taken prisoner. Many of them, suffering from hypothermia, burns, and shrapnel wounds, would be interrogated for intelligence purposes. Inside the interrogation rooms, high-ranking Iranian officers were questioned intensely. These officers, carrying encrypted tablets with critical data, had hoped to keep their plans hidden, but within 36 hours, U.S. cyber forensics experts had cracked their codes. What they uncovered was far worse than anticipated. The Iranian invasion plans were not limited to the Oregon coast. Satellite imagery and decrypted data revealed that Iran had been planning 2 more amphibious operations, targeting other coastal regions of the U.S. These plans, now neutralized by the devastating blow dealt to Iran's fleet, would never see the light of day. The news of Iran's catastrophic defeat spread quickly. Military analysts and historians were stunned by the sheer speed and effectiveness of the U.S. Navy's response. News outlets around the world ran continuous coverage of the failed invasion, with headlines declaring the operation a historic victory. Analysts hailed it as the most decisive interception of an amphibious assault in modern military history, surpassing even the famous Falklands War. The Pentagon, keen to showcase the success of the operation, released satellite imagery that painted a vivid picture of the battle's aftermath. The ocean was littered with debris, oil slicks stretching over 5 nautical miles, and over 40 square miles of wreckage marking the location of the sunken Iranian fleet. The sight of twisted metal, sinking ships, and burning wrecks told the story of the destruction in a way words never could. For the Iranian government, the humiliation was palpable. In Tehran, officials scrambled to explain how an entire invasion force had been obliterated in under 6 minutes. Iran had underestimated the reach and precision of American military technology, and the world was now fully aware of the consequences of such an error. On the ground, U.S. Navy recruiters were flooded with inquiries. Within just 72 hours of the operation, Navy recruitment calls spiked by 47% as young Americans sought to be part of the force that had executed such a flawless mission. Meanwhile, defense analysts across the globe began rethinking their strategies, particularly those involved in amphibious warfare. Iran's attempt to breach American shores had been met with an overwhelming layered response that left no room for error. The destruction of the Iranian fleet was not just a tactical victory. It was a message. The U.S. had shown that any attempt to invade its territory, no matter how well planned or executed, would be met with an instant coordinated response. The kill-box concept, previously a closely held American secret, was now on full display for the world to see. Iran's military planners sitting in their war rooms were now forced to reevaluate everything. The loss of senior officers and the capture of invasion maps, logistical schedules, and contingency plans made it clear that this was not a fluke. The United States had turned the tables on them with ruthless precision. International observers who had once questioned the U.S.'s ability to defend its shores against modern amphibious assaults now saw a new reality. Nations with similar ambitions, especially those with naval or coastal assault capabilities, began quietly reassessing their strategies. The concept of a stealthy, low-profile amphibious invasion was no longer a guaranteed way to bypass U.S. defenses. The success of Operation Black Tide meant that the U.S. could at any moment deploy overwhelming firepower to stop any would-be invaders before they could establish a foothold. Back in Washington, D.C., officials were careful in their celebrations. The operation had been successful, but its implications stretched far beyond a single battle. The strategic shockwaves from this mission would echo for years to come. For the U.S., it was a reaffirmation of its military supremacy. For Iran, it was a stark reminder that no amount of stealth could outmaneuver the power of U.S. precision warfare. By 3:10 a.m., just under an hour after the first strike, the battle was over. The Iranian forces had been decimated, their plans crushed in less time than it took to make the decision to act. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that comes after overwhelming force has been unleashed. The kind of silence that made it clear America's shores would never be easy to breach. Now, as the wreckage of the Iranian invasion force lay scattered across the ocean floor, one thing was clear: the U.S. had delivered a resounding message to the world. Any attempt to challenge its sovereignty would be met with swift, coordinated, and overwhelming retaliation. The ocean had returned to calm, but the ramifications of the operation would shape military strategy across the globe for years to come. As the world watched in awe, the full scope of Operation Black Tide's success was revealed. It wasn't just the immediate destruction of an invading fleet, it was the strategic message sent globally. The U.S. military had just demonstrated the effectiveness of its advanced surveillance systems, its precision strike capabilities, and its seamless coordination among multiple branches of the armed forces. In less than 6 minutes, Iran's most audacious military gamble had been reduced to nothing more than a trail of destruction. The United States had not only defended its shores but had displayed the full extent of its technological superiority. Military analysts across the world began re-evaluating their own defensive strategies. Nations once comfortable with the idea of stealth amphibious invasions now understood that the U.S. had the ability to detect and eliminate such threats before they could even reach the shore. For Iran, the loss was catastrophic. Beyond the physical destruction of their fleet and military assets, the operation revealed a level of American military prowess that Iran had clearly underestimated. The captured Iranian officers, now prisoners, were held in a U.S. facility where their intelligence was quickly interrogated. The encrypted devices they carried, containing invasion plans for future operations, were cracked, revealing disturbing details of Iran's upcoming military movements. This invaluable information allowed the U.S. military to preemptively neutralize Iran's planned amphibious assaults, further devastating Iran's military strategy. The public release of this intelligence, detailing the failed invasion and its devastating consequences, sparked an international outcry. Iran's credibility on the global stage was shattered, and their already tenuous relations with Western nations worsened dramatically. Meanwhile, the American public watched as the scale of the operation's success became clear. News outlets and social media exploded with coverage of the event, emphasizing the sheer speed, precision, and power of the U.S. military. Military experts appeared on talk shows, praising the U.S. Navy's ability to execute such a complex operation with zero American casualties. The story became a symbol of American resilience and might, particularly in the face of an adversary that had believed it could bypass the world's most formidable military force. Yet amid the celebrations and media coverage, military officials remained cautious. They knew that the success of Operation Black Tide was not a guarantee of future invulnerability. The U.S. military had simply demonstrated that it was prepared for any scenario, ready to adapt and overcome the challenges posed by an ever-evolving threat landscape. The operation was a reminder that the U.S. Navy's capabilities were unmatched, but there was always room for further innovation and improvement. At the same time, the Iranian government found itself in a difficult position. Their military defeat was compounded by their inability to spin the narrative. In an age of instant global communication, it was impossible to conceal the scale of their failure. Iran's military and political leadership scrambled to formulate a response, but they could only manage to downplay the operation's significance in a few scattered statements. Behind closed doors, however, senior officials understood the severity of the loss. The impact on Iran's strategic thinking would be long-lasting, and it was clear that the military leadership would need to reassess their approach to coastal warfare entirely. Operation Black Tide had sent shockwaves through Iran's military establishment, but the ripple effects were also being felt by countries across the globe. Nations with aggressive or expansionist tendencies began to rethink their military strategies. The Iranian debacle had shown them that stealth tactics and surprise amphibious assaults were no longer reliable methods of gaining a foothold in contested regions. The success of the U.S. operation had fundamentally changed the calculus of military warfare. The U.S. military also learned valuable lessons from the operation. While the outcome was overwhelmingly successful, there were opportunities for further refinement in their strategies. The integration of new technologies, the coordination between various branches of the armed forces, and the effective use of unmanned systems had all contributed to the victory. Yet the U.S. military remained vigilant, knowing that adversaries would adapt, and that future conflicts could bring new, unpredictable challenges. For the average American, however, the operation marked a moment of pride. The heroic actions of the U.S. Navy, the seamless execution of the mission, and the display of overwhelming power served as a reaffirmation of the country's military might. The message was clear: the United States was not a nation to be taken lightly, and any attempt to challenge its sovereignty would be met with swift, decisive action. As for the Iranian Marines who had been captured, they became a sobering reminder of the human cost of such an ill-fated invasion. While the operation had resulted in 0 American casualties, the same could not be said for Iran. Over 300 Iranian Marines lost their lives in a matter of minutes, with hundreds more left stranded, wounded, or drowning in the cold waters of the Pacific. The image of Iranian survivors being pulled from the ocean by American recovery teams would remain burned into the minds of the international community for years to come. As the wreckage of the Iranian fleet slowly began to sink to the ocean floor, the U.S. Navy began clearing the area, preparing for the inevitable recovery efforts. The debris from the Iranian assault force, including tanks, APCs, and other military hardware, would take weeks to recover, yet the significance of what had just transpired went beyond the wreckage. It had set a new precedent in the art of naval warfare, one that would be studied and analyzed for decades to come. For Iran, the emotional and strategic toll would be immense. The loss of a fleet, the deaths of hundreds of soldiers, and the failure of their carefully laid plans would take years to recover from. As the news of the defeat spread across the Middle East and beyond, Iran's regional allies would undoubtedly question their own military strategies, perhaps reconsidering any plans to challenge U.S. power. In the end, Operation Black Tide wasn't just about winning a battle, it was about sending a message to the world. The United States had demonstrated, without a doubt, that no enemy would be able to breach its shores without paying a severe price.